Hey there, and welcome to the Sudo Show, brought to you by the Destination Linux Network. Today, we take some audience feedback and dive into some common mistakes sysadmins make, some of our favorite tips, and discuss how to stay informed. All that and more on this episode of the Sudo Show. Welcome to the Sudo Show, your home for all things enterprise open source. I'm Eric, the IT guy, and joining me every episode is a co-host equivalent to Master Yoda, Brandon Johnson. How are you doing today, buddy?
Stupid your puns are. Yes.
Yeah. That for now on, that's how you have to introduce yourself.
No.
So our last few episodes have covered a range of operation-specific topics, from a journey into the world of cloud IT, security breaches, and building a home lab. These topics have raised a number of great discussions on our Matrix channel. In fact, if you aren't there, you definitely should go create an account and join us in sudoshow:/destinationlinux.network. Man, those addresses just roll right off the tongue, don't they? The full URL will be in the show notes. Anyway, Atypical Kernel, one of our community members, asked for tips and tricks Brandon and I used as systems administrators. Today, we decided to compile our list and share them with all of you.
In fact, our first tip goes hand in hand with our first sponsor. So it's important to have a solid password management strategy. Keeping complex passwords is a great way to keep unwanted actors out of your systems. And here at the Sudo Show, we turn to Bitwarden.
That's right. Bitwarden is the easiest and safest way for individuals, teams, and business organizations to store, share, and sync sensitive data. Bitwarden is an open source password management tool whose feature set rivals any other tool on the market today.
Our favorite password manager just keeps getting better. Recently, Bitwarden announced the availability of emergency access. If you have a premium, family, or enterprise plan, you can designate any other Bitwarden user as an emergency contact. This means that the grantee will be able to request view-only access or the ability to reset the master password of the account owner that granted that access.
I don't know about you, but their functionality peaked when they offered dark mode for their browser plugin. But you can get started for free by going to bitwarden.com/DLN. Then, when you see how amazing their tool is, you can get all those features for the low price of $10 per year. So head on over to bitwarden.com/DLN today to let Bitwarden know you heard about them here first. And thank you to Bitwarden for sponsoring the Sudo Show. We started the segment off talking about passwords, so let's talk a little bit more about that.
So, yeah, let's talk about passwords. I mean, we recently had an episode talking about SolarWinds hack. Reading the articles, there's obviously a bit more complexity behind this, but for the most part, the problem was bad password hygiene. That was basically the root of the attack, bad password hygiene. Password complexity is very important. Generating passwords that are not just hard for humans to guess, also passwords that are hard for machines to guess.
To be honest, this isn't something that I worry all that much about. Ever since I started using Password Manager years ago, it's just, the only difference now is I went from 8 characters up to 16, and I make sure to crank up the number of numbers and symbols. And of course, it's really hilarious when I hand my Bitwarden password over to my wife, and she goes, "Really? You want me to type that in?" It's like, no, just it's in the family account. Just go and copy it out of there and paste it into the website, and it's all good. I don't have to care what my passwords are anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the most part, I don't either. If a site allows it, I actually lean more towards passphrases because there's more characters. If I need to with a passphrase, I can actually remember a passphrase versus a long 20-character password. Passphrases are generally harder for machines to guess. So that's typically my suggestion, especially for like if I have like a web-facing SSH connection, which I rarely do. I normally don't allow passwords for that, but if I needed to, it would be a long, complex passphrase versus a password. But generally for my accounts, I like to go with passphrases.
Yeah, passphrases are a great idea. And arguably, they're they're harder to crack, but they're easier to remember. You could take a song lyric or just a random sentence of gibberish and put it into a password manager, but that pattern, it would be easier to memorize and not have to rely on your password manager for everything. Mm-hmm. But here's something to think about, and this is something I haven't been good about unless there's been a breach, is password rotation. Honestly, I haven't rotated any of my very secure passwords in a long time. How about you?
I have a practice around this. If it is finance, anything that has a credit card basically associated with it, banking, my Amazon account, or pretty much basically anything with that has my credit card associated with it, I rotate my passwords typically every 6 months. I know best practice is more like in security is more like 3 months. 6 months is pretty good practice. And then other passwords, I will rotate yearly, or if I see it on, you've been pwned. Of course, I use Bitwarden for that. And I have reminders in my calendar to go change certain passwords. Just pretty much if it's critical to my identity, I'm very vigilant when it comes to password rotation.
That's a great point. And from time to time, like my family's moved a few times in the last couple of years. And when I go in to change credit card information or change our billing or mailing address, a lot of times if I think of it, I will try and rotate that password as well. Not to keep bragging on our sponsor, but Bitwarden does have the Vault Health reports, which I found to be really helpful. It points out anytime you have duplicate passwords, points out any websites in its database that have been hacked. And Brandon mentioned a good one that we'll also link in the show notes. And it's, I think you've been pwned.com. It's a community sourced compilation of sites and applications that have recently seen breaches. And it really brings just kind of an independent look at your account health. You can go through and look at the recent list. And in fact, if I remember correctly, you can even put in your email address or common usernames that you use, and it can tell you if that account name has shown up in any information that has been dumped out to the internet.
This service I also use, it gets it from that same source, is Firefox Monitor.
Oh, yeah.
I use Firefox is my default browser, and it's right there built into Firefox. So I use Firefox Monitor to keep track of if there's any compromised accounts. I use Firefox Monitor. Also, on top of that, we're also here to talk about how we handled this as a system administrator. Now, a lot of the tools that we have today are actually fairly recent. Like Vault, I didn't have. So like getting like an SSH password or something, it was in some cases, it was in an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, I've been in organizations where that is definitely the truth. Or even better yet, a just plain text file on some department share. That was fun.
Yeah, and today I would use HashiCorp Vault. That would be my default way of handling secrets, whether that's SSH passwords, database passwords, whatever it is. But a tool that's been around for a very long time uses GPG encryption to encrypt your passwords. And I used this at previous organizations. It's a utility called Pass. And it's a command line utility, and you can put passwords right into the clipboard or pass them into other commands. Pass was awesome. I was using it for quite some time when I first went back to Linux as my full-time desktop for password management. And then I realized fairly quickly that Pass would not work for my wife. So that's when when I discovered Bitwarden. Things like Pass, great for system administrators. Vault, great for system administrators.
And application development as well as CI/CD pipelines. In fact, I use Ansible to deploy most of my SSH keys to new systems that I'm building. And most of those SSH keys or config files are encrypted with Ansible Vault.
Yeah, that's very smart. And that's it. So Vault, whether it's HashiCorp Vault, Ansible Vault, probably some of the best ways of handling secrets for automation. for development use cases. Pass, I think, is one of the best tools for any Linux administrator out there. And Eric, like as a Linux system administrator, how often did you log in as root?
Actually, not very often. Not very often. In fact, that was one battle that I didn't have to fight as often as you might think. Most of the organizations that I worked for had a firm belief in not running any commands as root, and if you did, to at least log in as yourself and then sudo over to root first. Typically, the root password was some 64 character long password that was stored in an isolated KeyPass file somewhere on a flash drive or something. But for the most part, the root password was not available to the typical systems administrator, much less DBAs or developers. It was handled with a combination of SSH keys and sudoers access.
In terms of centralized sudoers management, there's quite a few proprietary tools out there to handle this, like that integrate with Active Directory. But I've been asked recently by customers, by just fellow members in the community, how would I handle this today? I haven't been a system administrator for quite some time, but when I was a system administrator, I wish there was a tool like FreeIPA out there. I love FreeIPA. It's probably one of my favorite identity tools out there. If you're not familiar with it, it stands for, so it's FreeIPA, Free Identity, Policy, and Audit. So in terms of identity, it uses a open source project called 389 Directory Server, which is part of Fedora, and then and Kerberos as well. So you can have a single sign-on, things like that. And that also has policy. It's actually missing the audit part right now. That's actually getting fixed. But from in terms of policy, you can set policies at the system level, and you can centrally manage sudo. So if you want, you can have like typical Gauderite sudo that you can run whatever command you want through sudo, or you can really limit the commands that someone can run through the utility. And the best part about it versus the proprietary tools, it uses standard Linux commands and processes. So you don't need to worry about installing some third-party utility that you can't look at the source for if that's something you care about. And FreeIPA is probably it's still my favorite open source project, like in the at least top 5. It integrates with your existing corporate directory services. Typically that's Active Directory through Active Directory trusts. And if you don't have if you're starting from scratch, it's a great way to get started with a directory service. So
we're on a good clip here. Why don't we continue down the server management front, and we'll talk about when I was a systems administrator, it became kind of a running joke that every time I joined a new company, either as a contractor or even some of the full-time jobs that I worked, I always ended up becoming the patching guy. I was always the one who got stuck organizing a patching process, and then it seems like once you get a label, you can never get rid of it. So for multiple jobs, it was my job to make sure our servers were patched. There's so many different ways to divide this up. There's different beliefs on different schedules. But for me, what I found worked best is a quarterly patch cycle. That means that in the first month of a quarter, the dev environment would get patched. You just pull down all the patches to a central repository, whether that was Red Hat Satellite or Spacewalk, or nowadays it's Foreman. So you pull down all your packages and basically create a snapshot of a directory. 2, you're looking at QA, at test, at maybe even your staging environment. And then the third month of the quarter, you're looking at production, DR, anything else that is customer facing. Arguably, that gives you about 60 days or a little bit more to validate that all of your applications, all of your automation isn't broken by anything that's done in a patch. And you do that 4 times a year. But as a systems administrator, the quarterly patch cycle seems to have been the one that didn't interfere as much with the business operations.
Building patching life cycles has gotten so much easier over the last few years. Spacewalk, which was the upstream project for Red Hat Satellite 5, quite frankly, was terrible. Because you had to clone the repo, make a, do all kinds of incantations that made sense in your head. Foreman, coupled with Catello, which is the upstream for Red Hat Satellite 6 and soon to be 7, makes that life cycle management of patching so much easier. So you make a content view and you go, okay, this content view is for this quarter. If you're using your example for quarterly patching, this is for this quarter's patching, Q1 of 2020. And you just promote it through the cycle. Okay, I promoted it to dev from the library, promote it then to test QA, and promote it to prod. And what's cool about it is then you can automate the patching. So make it, schedule it to as soon as it gets promoted through it goes and applies patch on the schedule during your maintenance.
Definitely.
Windows.
And to kind of build on that works great for your legacy environments, systems that you're still kind of treating like pets versus cattle. Whereas in kind of the cattle mentality, patching is even easier because your patches are put into your servers at the template level. Every time, whether you do it on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, you go in, you boot up your template servers, you run your patches, you run your Ansible scripts or your Terraform or whatever against your templates, and then everything else that you built is pulled from those templates. So your patching is kind of built in, and then it's even less of an issue if you're doing some kind of infrastructure on demand type of a setup. All the patches are already there when the system's built. It's always built against the latest golden image. It just makes patching so much easier. No more late night staying up until 4 a.m. trying to patch things on a Saturday night when you're half asleep.
Yeah, exactly. And update container images, update your virtual images, so much easier because you can just upload the new image, upload the new version to OpenStack or to Amazon, and you're done. And you have your latest build of your OS.
So that works great in a normal day-to-day situation. But I mean, even just recently, we had the Sudo bug come out. What would you recommend for systems administrators to do in those situations where a massive vulnerability has been announced, patches have been released to the upstream repositories, now we got to get it into the business systems?
Actually, it's just an accelerated version of what I was describing with Foreman Catello, and that's just promoting it faster. You create a new content view that has that patch, and you just promote it through. Go promote it, test it, promote it, test it, promote it to prod, and schedule its rollout. And obviously, during your typical maintenance windows. That's with traditional. Now with today, with more cloud native style deployments, it's typically you update your virtual machine templates or your container image and you redeploy. And it's as simple as that today. But if you're still maintaining more traditional systems, which aren't going away anytime soon, I'll probably retire and there still be people not doing cloud native.
I'm pretty sure I'll retire before some of the Ubuntu 12.4 servers that I've managed will go out of service.
I hope they're gone.
Hey, the last company I worked for as a sysadmin still had Ubuntu 12.04 servers and or CentOS 4. I mean, we had all kinds of legacy. It was bad.
Hey, I have a customer that has hardware in production that went end of life in 2005. So, yeah, Oracle 9i. That's so.
Just had flashbacks on that one.
Stuff that's impossible to patch.
Yeah,
definitely in an isolated zone. I hope so. Part of patching comes compliance. I've worked in healthcare. I'm working with telecommunications these days. Compliance is huge. So specifically, I'm not talking like license compliance. I'm talking security compliance.
I think that's the one thing that people hate more than they hate patching.
When I was in healthcare, we utilized, actually, it was pretty early for this project when I was leaving, and that was OpenSCAP. The OpenSCAP project has some fantastic utilities. It's all integrated now into Foreman and Catello. But There's some pre-built policies around PCI and also some government policies as well. But what's really cool is you can build your own. So if you have if you need to build a policy to secure a system, you can download the OpenSCAP workbench and build your policy and then go apply it to your systems. And then it's a lot like Ansible in that way. Like it actually can use Ansible. You can use SCAP to just go secure a fleet of systems. Go, oh, all of these need to be PCI compliant. There's a standard profile. Go, boom. And if you need to tweak it for your auditor, you tweak it and go apply it everywhere. Same with like HIPAA compliance. Like you can build profiles in SCAP that meet those requirements. And what's great is a lot of the profiles that were built for government or even for PCI get you 90% there for your requirement, if not more. So it's something that is always at the front of my mind. It is compliance, because with my career growing up in healthcare, I'm always thinking about, can someone get access to the system through some silly means and get access to patient data? That was always at the top of my mind, because I was dealing with healthcare claims and all that, and had to make sure your systems were fully compliant to the HIPAA
So I've
standard.
worked for theater chains, for hardware distributors. So I've had a lot of experience with PCI. Unfortunately, neither of those environments talked about OpenSCAP or even just the SCAP protocol. This is something I actually didn't spend much time with until I came to Red Hat. So maybe for our listeners who are familiar with HIPAA or PCI, who aren't familiar with SCAP, maybe just in a quick couple of sentences, why don't you tell folks what those policies do? Do they make changes to individual servers? Maybe kind of walk folks through that.
Yeah, so it actually makes core configuration changes. And sometimes it's just a check. So like, for example, in the PCI, what's the account access and access control look like? What's the logging look like? And even down to what partition is var logon? Like that could be one of the requirements. Big one is like, what's the password quality with PAM or just the general system authentication? And it will make those changes. We'll say, here's a remediation script or Ansible playbook to remediate that. And you can not just have a profile that then applies the remediation, you can see at a glance what the profile will change, what it's recommending to change, and how far you are out of compliance. That's what SCAP does. That's what SCAP helps you do. It helps you understand where you are with your systems from a compliance standpoint.
When I came across the OpenSCAP project and started learning about some of the capabilities and some of the profiles that are being built out there, I was really excited, because I'm sure a lot of you listening can relate to what I'm about to say. Our version of compliance was once a year, once every 6 months, some third-party auditor would come in, would run this black box scan. They just tell us to run the script on all of our servers as root, which always made my hair stand up. But they were supposedly certified and licensed to tell me to do that. And then what we get back is this 3,000 line spreadsheet with multiple different pages telling us everything that was wrong with our systems. There's no rhyme or reason to how it was laid out. It was just page after page after page of Excel spreadsheet telling us all these things that we needed to fix. So having a framework like OpenSCAP, where you can just say, hey, this is a credit card front end machine, so it needs to be PCI compliant. Set this profile on the box. It will configure itself the way it needs to be. It'll give you the remediation scripts that you need to bring your system within compliance, and then to be able to manage it from a central location. Amazing. I was excited when I came across the OpenSCAP project, so much so that I think Brandon and I are going to have an episode on it probably a little bit later in the year. But it's really something that is changing how systems administrators do their jobs and helping to protect customer data and private, personally identifiable information as well. Hey, Brandon, how's your CIDR notation? And do you have your subnet calculator ready? Because one of the things that drives me crazy as a systems administrator is IP address management.
Yeah, IP address management. The thing is, it's the easiest thing to handle, quite frankly. And I'm going to say it is the easiest thing to implement in an organization.
Sadly, though, it's also one of the easiest things to break.
That's true. That can be kind of true. But IP address management at every organization I worked for was an Excel spreadsheet.
Same.
And it's like, why? And there are some fantastic, I've worked with many proprietary IP address management tools, building integrations for cloud forums and other products. IP address management open source tools have come a long way. One of the first ones I've came across was PHP IPAM. Give you one guess which language
Perl.
it's written in. Yeah, go with that. Starts with a P, Eric. But
I was close.
But what's really cool about PHP IPAM is it will actually discover what IP addresses are already in use on your network. You give it a range and it will go, okay, this is in use, and then automatically allocate those machines. And then you just need to go update it appropriately. One that I came across a couple of years ago, and I implemented it in my home lab, and I use it to manage the IP addresses in my home lab across all the VLANs that I have. Open source project by DigitalOcean called Netbox. I really like Netbox. Netbox doesn't just do IP address management. Actually, this is a tool that if you just manage multiple racks of servers, like in data center closets, you can build a map of what servers are in the rack. And you just say, okay, and at this point in the rack, it's a top of rack switch. Below that is a 4U server that's connected to this port. That's a lot of manual updates, obviously, but it's a great way of immediately knowing where things are, and it's a great way of handling documentation. Whether if you're running an IT shop for a large corporation or you're managing, like I said, managing multiple IT closets for small businesses, that should be your documentation. Some people, their documentation was the photo of the last time they went to that rack. This is a better way of doing it, because you update it in the system, and it's not a picture. It's actually data that you update, and it's phone friendly. So if you're in the data center, you can go, that's where that is. Okay, cool. You can go look at the rack on your phone and make sure to pull the cable from port 32, not from port 23. It's a good way of documenting your entire data set.
You mean I don't have to fire up Angry IP Scan on my desktop and update my Excel spreadsheet anymore? This is awesome.
Netbox is one of the most fully featured solutions out there. It doesn't do, some of the more proprietary solutions come with DNS, which is fantastic, because then you can check out an IP address and also update DNS. Yeah, you have to integrate with some other DNS solution with Netbox, but a lot of our audience is probably prefers Bind anyway.
Well, now that my mind has been blown that I don't have to maintain all these Excel spreadsheets anymore, we've been trying to kind of straddle the line between legacy data center operations, like Brandon and I came up in the industry managing, and the kind of the newer cloud native approach to managing infrastructure. What this culture shift has done is it's created a new, maybe a subclass, if you will, of systems administrator. People that are more developer centered. They're developers by trade, or they're security engineers who don't spend all day, every day running sudo commands. And now they've suddenly been asked to provision their own development environment, whether that's on their laptop or whether that's on some kind of a centrally managed server. They have to set up their own Linux environment. And instead of getting down deep into the techno kung fu that can be the bash shell, instead, one of my favorite tools, and even as a veteran systems administrator, I find myself using more and more, is Cockpit. When it comes to container management, virtual machine management, even disk layouts. I'm a very visual person. And so now when I'm managing disk partitions, I love using Cockpit. And for those that haven't heard of this, oh my gosh, go install Fedora. start up Cockpit because it is amazing. It is tying in all these command line utilities into WebUI. There's dashboards, there's, like I said, disk management. Virtual machine management is off the hook. My home server lab, I managed all of my servers through Cockpit. It's amazing.
Yeah, Cockpit virtual machine management is quickly becoming feature parity. And in many ways, it's already better than Virt Manager from a GUI perspective. Like there's still some obvious features that are not in Cockpit yet for virtual machine management, but starting VM, creating VM, taking snapshots, that just came in a recent version of Cockpit, adding networks, doing the vast majority of use cases. Like adding devices, like special devices is not yet there, but it is definitely one of my favorite ways of managing virtual machines. Actually, one of the things that when Cockpit first came out, I actually was kind of off put by it. I'm like, hey, these admin tool, web admin, because web admin tools for Linux traditionally have been, I'm trying to come up with a nice word that describes how terrible they are, but and also other utilities that kind of do what Cockpit does. Like in the early days of Yast, the tool in SUSE, it's not a web utility, but it was a utility that kind of was trying to accomplish the same goal: make it easier for administrators to manage SUSE Linux.
And who didn't love a good TUI to try and set up users?
I mean, Yast, for all in all, worked pretty well, but it had a couple of drawbacks. And this is very old data. This is like SUSE circa 2006, 2007 timeframe. If you made a configuration change, say to your network or to your host file outside of Yast, it would blow away your configuration. So one of the things that if I recommend to my customers to utilize Cockpit to admins that may not be senior Linux administrators, is it going to impact that? One of the things that's really cool about Cockpit is the way it manages state. If you change it from the CLI or you change it in Cockpit, it's utilizing the same data. So if it's pulling from a configuration file, it's pulling from the same configuration file. It's not pulling it from some database. That's one of the things I really, really love about Cockpit. This week's episode is brought to you by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean offers the simplest, most developer-friendly cloud platform. You can get started today with a $100 free credit by going to do.co/DLN and creating an account.
DigitalOcean is helping you get your apps to market faster with their app platform. Here, you can build, deploy, and scale apps quickly by utilizing their simple, fully managed solution. Let DigitalOcean handle the infrastructure, app runtimes, dependencies, so you can focus on getting from code to production in just a few clicks.
The app platform starts at just $5 a month and has support for Node.js, Python, PHP, Ruby, Hugo, and many more. Get started today by going to do.co/DLN to get your $100 free credit. The promo is good for 2 months and will let you play with all kinds of ready-to-deploy apps right from the DigitalOcean marketplace. That's do.co/DLN. And thank you to DigitalOcean for sponsoring this episode of the Sudo Show.
We spent a lot of time talking about different tools and different procedures to follow. There's another element to this that I wanted to touch on, and that's staying informed, and not just from an educational standpoint, but from a day-to-day perspective. Case in point, everyone that listens to the show knows that I love Todoist. I live and breathe through my Todoist. They had an outage beginning of February, I think it was, and it went on for 3 or 4 hours. And so when I was trying to make changes on my phone and then go and look at those changes on the web console, it wasn't syncing. And so, of course, it had to have been, my Wi-Fi. So you take the phone off Wi-Fi and you try and sync again, and it still doesn't work. Then you start getting timeout errors, and then you're like, okay, well, maybe it's not my network. And so go figure. I'm not sure when this started, but one of the best places I've found to look up outages or performance degradations on an application that I use is go check Twitter. When did that become a thing? But sure enough, I went out to Twitter and I went to Todoist handle, and sure enough, there was a thread that was forming around this service outage. So I literally found out that my application was having trouble through Twitter. I don't know if you've had any similar experiences, Brandon, but I'm sure there's a few better, more informed places to get your news from.
That actually, it was the early days of Twitter, but that's how I found out about an AWS outage. I think it was in 2011. So
I seem to
didn't hear
remember
it from
one.
Amazon, and I was a customer. Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Well, nowadays we know that there's an AWS outage because half the internet becomes unavailable.
Yeah. Staying up to date on technology, can be a full-time job in itself. I mean, Eric writes for Front Page Linux. We talk about some fun stuff over there. I've made a couple of videos, one about Overt, one about Mist.io. Following stuff like that is important. Ars Technica is probably my go-to for technology news in the general media, and keeping up to date with everyone's doing in the industry. Ars Technica has done a very good job cataloging whenever there's a major IT conference. So Ars Technica has definitely been one of my go-tos.
Yeah, Ars Technica is actually where I first heard about the SolarWinds hack.
I think that might have been Ars for me as well. A lot of technology, I've just stumbled across some random article that someone posts on the Fedora magazine page.
So news aggregators are a great place to go and get current news, to find tutorials that are short and to the point, to learn a new application or a new way to configure something that you've done for years, and it's definitely a good place to find out about major vulnerabilities. I mean, with the media cycle, it's just by the time a vulnerability is reported, there's usually a half a page article written somewhere about it, and sometimes that's quicker and more to the point than some of these long CVE articles. So go out, look at some of these sites, and make them part of your daily routine. If you can have processes like patching and compliance in place, then it's not going to be a major deal when the next vulnerability comes out or when the next version of one of your key applications is released. It makes life so much easier. In this segment of the Productivity Corner, we wanted to follow up on a topic that we talked about not too long ago. We talked about 30, 60, 90 and how that helps you plan long term. Brandon, you mentioned during that episode something that we wanted to revisit. We've mentioned this in passing a few times, but never really dove in real deep. So you and I both use GTD, or getting things done, to keep our productivity levels up. Why don't you share with folks what GTD is and how you use it?
Getting started with GTD is actually pretty simple. It's 5 steps. So the first part is capture what you have. Basically take everything and put it in a box. So like if you're talking like physical files and papers, just take everything, put it in a box and go through it. Know what it is. The whole premise is if it's 5 minutes or less, act on it immediately. When you go through and organize it. So let's take your email inbox, for example. As you go through it, if it takes you 5 minutes or less to act on that action, do it right there and then archive it. Just get it out of your inbox. So that's, kind of goes to the capture, clarify, and organize. And part of this is also reviewing your inbox. Go make sure, okay, did I capture everything? It's going through the whole cycle over and over and over again. Capture, clarify, organize, review, and engage. All 5 of those steps can take in that 5-minute span, or maybe it just needs to be longer. I've used GTD to plan out whole projects because it is that useful. If you actually really think about it, the 5 steps in GTD sound a lot like Scrum in many ways, and because it's all about capturing the requirements, clarifying it, organizing it, review, and actually doing.
Well, the nice thing is, especially with that 5-minute counter, you can go in, you can get all this little stuff off your plate, out of your head, and that frees you up to focus on bigger and better tasks. And what I found is GTD can really work well for me when I go through kind of my routine and check all my notifications and throw everything. And it may not be a physical file box anymore, but kind of in a mental box. Just throw it all together, see what I have to do, knock out the easiest things first. And then especially with longer projects. In fact, I've actually been able to publish blog posts lately with some frequency because I broke down a blog post into its smaller steps, break those down into bite-sized chunks of, well, instead of just looking at a blank doc in Joplin and going, okay, I'm going to write a blog post. Cool. And then you sit there for 20 minutes and go, okay, that was a great waste of time. On to the next task. Instead, you say, okay, I'm going to research topic ideas. I'm going to take some time to brainstorm those ideas. I'm going to write an outline. I want to write a draft, and then I'm going to edit, peer review, and then format and publish. I mean, you can break those things down even further. Maybe today I just want to write the introduction. However you want to slice and dice that work, you can put it together in some type of a format that speaks to you, that you can really understand what kind of work you have to do. But you can it gives you a high level view and a view down in the trenches. I know my favorite tool is Todoist. Hands down, it is my brain dump. It's where my emails go. It's where all my projects live, all my tasks, bills that for some reason I can't pay automatically. Everything's in there. And at the time of this recording, this is how much I brain dump into Todoist. At this time, I have 232 open tasks in my Todoist.
Eric, I am pretty sure that you are a paid sponsor of Todoist.
They really should. Okay, so if anybody from Todoist is listening, I at least want a T-shirt or something here. But it really is an amazing tool because I've been able to capture projects and ideas and dump them into a project in Todoist. And I actually get around to it at some point because I go through it. I use our 30, 60, 90 plan, and I figure out what I want to get done that quarter. And by capturing these projects or these ideas, especially when it comes to creating content, I don't remember how many different tasks I have for Sudoshow or for blog posts. Just, hey, that would make a great blog post. I want to put that as a task in Todoist, and eventually when I go through and plan, I'll come back, I'll see that idea, I'll remember what I wanted to talk about, and I can get it scheduled. But I will admit that Todoist probably isn't the only tool.
So there are plenty, and the ones I like are open source, unlike Todoist.
I know.
Granted, everything I'll mention that implements GTD pretty well can integrate with Todoist, except for one of them. The first one that actually integrates with Todoist is Planner. It's an elementary OS application. It's a beautiful app. Integrates with Todoist, or you can just use its own local database. It's a great application.
In my defense, the next major release of Planner, I think, pretty much brings it feature parity with the web interface for Todoist. And ironically, I have a task in Todoist to go and check out Planner here in a month or so.
So the other one, I kind of split my time between these two apps, and I'm actually planning on migrating to just one. So I started utilizing the development version of GNOME To Do, which is based on GTK4, and it has a very nice GTD workflow. It's very similar to the GTD workflow that you can get out of Apple Tasks or Apple Reminders. I really like the workflow that is in the new To Do. But one that I really like, and it's a project that was resurrected from the dead. I mentioned this several episodes ago, and that was an application called Getting Things GNOME. Getting Things GNOME is a pure GTD workflow in its purest form. It is a GTD workflow. I mean, it's obviously not endorsed by GTD or anything like that, but it takes that workflow and really makes it work. I haven't decided which one I'm going to finally land on, but right now, almost everything ends up in GNOME To Do simply because the evolution integration. Because I just right click on an email, say create a task, and it doesn't go into GTG, it goes into GNOME To Do. Getting Things Gnome, it's a great application. They're working on sync services. They're working on integration with other applications like time trackers and stuff like that. So Getting Things Gnome is I think is a really good application still. And if you can contribute to it, I suggest people do. I mean, it's a project that was declared dead and then resurrected. I'm very glad that
and it doesn't
back.
have to be a piece of software. I mean, you go to Scrum planning sessions and their tool of choice is a marker board. And if you really want to get specific, it's a marker board with multicolored Post-it notes. So it doesn't have to be some high-tech cross-platform tool to track all of this. It could be something as simple as a marker board and some sticky notes.
The preferred tracking methodology with GTD is a piece of paper.
In fact, there's a lot to be said for going with a low-tech option, especially when it comes to planning your productivity, because when you tie everything into a mobile device, there's so many distractions. It would be so easy to go in and get on Twitter. God forbid you start watching cat videos on YouTube, and then you forgot what that brilliant project you wanted to start was. Sometimes the low-tech option is the right option.
Absolutely. And people think I'm nuts, but I still have a paper planner. It's simply because sometimes paper is better. But that's more, and it's more for my long-term stuff, not for like short-term stuff is always on the computer because it's always in front of me. But long-term tasks, long-term projects, it's easier for me to reference in a traditional planner.
I don't have a planner anymore, but right here on my desk, I know it's an audio podcast, and I just held up my planner for all to see. But picture, if you will, a small journal. I love these because they're small. They can sit on my nightstand. I have multiples of them all over the house, in my office, in the living room, in our bedroom, and they just, all of them have a pen hooked to them. And I just pull out the pen, and if I have a sudden idea of something that I need to do or something that I want to think about, I use my paper journal as almost just a dumping place or a scratch pad for ideas. Or if there's something really, really bugging me, I can write it down, and usually that's enough to kind of clear my head. I've written half of blog posts before in my paper journal just because I hit an idea, it created a spark, and I just started writing. And the nice thing is you can take that paper and you can set it next to your keyboard. That can be part of your revision process. Is I just brain dumped this blog into this paper journal. Now that I'm ready to type it, now that I'm ready to make it ready for consumption, I've already got a draft done. I just have to type up what's good and change what's not as good. And there you go. I'm done.
So Eric, you introduced me to Inbox Zero, and I'm slowly getting there. As of this recording, I'm at 115 emails in my inbox. How do you implement GTD with Inbox Zero?
So Inbox Zero for me is part of that capture step of GTD. For me, that's going through my calendar, that's going through my email inboxes, and then the tasks that I have. And that's kind of how I start my day, is in that capture phase of going through emails. If it's just a quick response, or if it's just kind of an FYI type email, it gets archived. But if it's something that spawns a project, or if it requires some investigation, then that email becomes a task. And like Evolution, I can forward emails to a Todoist email account, and it shows up in my Todoist inbox. So I can sort it, I can assign it to a project, so I can give it a priority level. So Inbox Zero ties into the planning phase of GTD for me. And then if you think about it, all these different philosophies that we've talked about in the productivity corner really tie in together, because Inbox Zero builds onto GTD, and GTD builds into 30, 60, 90. I don't know, Brandon, maybe we should write a framework and publish a book and retire young.
Oh, I'd love to do that.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Like today's episode, much of our content comes right from you, our listeners. To be part of that conversation, you should head over to our Matrix room, sudoshow at destinationlinux.network. There's almost 200 of us chatting and sharing stories and ideas. It's a great place to hang out and connect with fellow technologists. If you'd like more of Brandon and I, you can find it over at sudo.show and on social media at sudoshow podcast. You can catch more awesome content over at our network partners, destinationlinux.network. Brandon, anywhere else you'd like to send folks?
You can follow me on Twitter at dbrannonjohnson or my website at open-tech.net.
And you can follow me at ITGuyEric or on itguyeric.com. Remember, the Sudo Show is your place for all things enterprise open source. Until next time.